It's snowing! Oh, what a beautiful scene. Welcome to day 6 of the Daily Language Diary. In today's video, we're gonna finally talk about a topic that I am so passionate about, and I think it is so important in promoting a much healthier and more sustainable approach to language learning. I believe fluency is a terrible success metric for language learning, and I think that this huge emphasis that has been built up around fluency as the primary goal and the primary measure of a successful language learner, I think it can be really harmful in making people, frankly, feel really bad about themselves. And I think that the way content has been created online, showing how fluent people are, and the way that a lot of creators tend to only show their languages at their best, and frankly, sometimes they're scripted or practiced ahead of time, I think it leads to this false impression that once you become fluent, you stay that way. When the reality is your level of fluency in any given language can fluctuate so much over time. So today I want to talk about the problems of fluency as a measure of success, and I want to try to give you what I think is a much healthier approach to setting your goals and seeing your own success as a language learner. So the first problem with fluency is that it is so incredibly subjective. We don't even have an agreed upon way to think about fluency, let alone a definition that we agree on. For example, in my opinion, fluency is a spectrum. I think that you can be conversationally fluent and you can be near native fluent and many things in between. And I don't think that you should have to be near native to be considered fluent. I think being conversationally fluent is absolutely a very valid thing to be, and I think it's a wonderful thing to celebrate. But to give you a deeper example, I have a video on this channel where I documented a 45-minute conversation all in Mandarin Chinese with a Taiwanese friend of mine, and I specifically made sure that it was unedited, we had no preparation ahead of time, and I did that so that you would see all the struggles, the pauses, the places where I made funny mistakes, as well as the parts where I did really well. I wanted it to be a truly accurate representation of my achievements in Mandarin Chinese. And I got some comments claiming that I was nowhere near fluent. I even had a couple of comments saying that I'm not fluent in any of my languages, which I think is kind of silly because let's take Japanese. I've documented myself being in Japan, being an interpreter, working in a coffee shop, going to university, forging unbelievable relationships in Japanese with people who spoke no English, and just having the most beautiful experiences one could ever hope for. And I've had similar experiences in French, and I could go on with examples from other languages. And so I think that highlights that, okay, if that's not fluent, then I don't really care. I don't really care about being fluent if that is not enough. And the second problem with fluency is that it changes. And honestly, it can change surprisingly quickly. If we go back to Japanese, which I just gave an example of how I think I was absolutely very, very fluent at one time, now I'm pretty rusty. I have not really been speaking Japanese for a lot of years. And so if I were to speak Japanese today, I can get through a conversation, but I am nowhere near. I'm not even close to where I used to be. And I don't think that negates all the things I've done in Japanese. I don't think that suddenly invalidates how successful I was as a Japanese learner. If we take the example of Italian, I just spoke Italian on this daily diary series a couple days ago, and I don't think my Italian performance was particularly good, but there were times in the past when I spoke Italian, I think, really quite fluently. And if I had even just a few days, let alone a couple of weeks, I could probably bring it back up tremendously. And even languages like Spanish, which I think I've also spoken to pretty high levels. I've done interviews, I've done all kinds of things in Spanish, including on this channel. Well, it's been a while. And so if I try to speak Spanish today, I may not appear terribly fluent. Once again, I'm pretty sure it would come back very quickly. And so I'm just trying to illustrate with several examples how ephemeral fluency can be and how it just depends on so many factors. And so I think if you tie your self-worth and your sense of success as a language learner to how fluent you are, it's just a recipe for having a very unstable view of yourself. And I think that it can lead to us feeling quite bad about ourselves, feeling kind of embarrassed or ashamed. And I think it can lead to us being a lot more hesitant to just put ourselves out there and enjoy speaking a language. And this is the reason that for my entire YouTube career, I've always tried so hard to make a point of showing the highs and the lows of my language learning journey. I've had videos where I specifically titled it, "Here's how bad my German has become." I did that on 2 different occasions and documented myself bringing my German back up to a higher level. And then I went on the Easy German YouTube channel and did a whole interview in German just to show how quickly things can change and to try and show that my methods actually work. As I said earlier, when I've done conversations in Mandarin, I filmed my very first Mandarin conversation and my second ever Mandarin conversation. I'm gonna speak a bunch of French probably for the rest of this month throughout this series as I'm documenting my journey back into French. And they will be unedited, unscripted, and you will probably see lots and lots of mistakes. And the reason why I do that is because I'm trying to be one of the people who gives a more realistic representation of what it looks like to be a lifelong language learner. If you're interested in learning a bunch of different languages, then it's inevitable that at certain times you're gonna have to place less emphasis on some of the languages. You might be like me, where some life circumstances result in having to leave behind a language for a number of years. But like I said earlier, I don't think that invalidates the things you have done in the past. So let's talk about what I personally think is a much better way to think about success in language learning. And I think that comes down to what have you done with that language and what has that language done for you in your life? For example, it is absolutely possible to have some of the most beautiful, deep, enriching human interactions in a different language without being fluent or even conversational. I'm going to tell you a quick, very beautiful story. So many years ago when I was in university, I ended up going to the mountains of Nuevo León in Mexico, and I was volunteering in this tiny village way up in the mountains, and nobody spoke English and my Spanish was really not good. Nobody would consider it fluent. But during my time over those 6 weeks in the mountains, I formed some of the most beautiful relationships with the villagers. I mean, it was so special to just find ways to communicate, find ways to tell stories and to understand others. And sometimes it was a struggle, but in some ways it made it even more beautiful. And there was a little girl there named Kelly who at the beginning was so mean to me. She would always cheat during the card games and she would always say really sassy things to me. But by the end of the trip, when I was leaving, she literally clung to my leg and was crying her eyes out because she didn't want me to leave. And all of that happened without me being fluent. And so I just think, you know, things like that, what kind of human interactions and relationships and just individual moments has that language brought you? It could also be books or cinema. Let's say that you've enjoyed watching movies in the language you're learning and it's brought you laughter and joy, maybe tears. That is a beautiful thing. And to me, that is absolutely a part of being a successful language learner. And I think the nice thing about measuring your success in this way, you know, what are the things you've done with that language and what has it brought to your life? Those things don't change. They don't go away. They cannot be erased. They don't get rusty. And so I think it's a much more forgiving way to think about your own self-worth and the experiences that you've had. And one last point I'd like to make is that I think this is a great way to also think about goals in language learning, right? Rather than thinking about just wanting to be fluent, focusing more on what kind of things do you want to do in that language? Do you want to be able to read poetry or maybe even do your own poetry and go to a poetry slam? Do you want to travel to the country and make genuine human interactions with people who live there? Do you want to read stories and books and maybe even engage with journalism in that language so that you can get a more authentic perspective? I think these are wonderful goals to have, and they will get you to fluency, but it's not the focus. And I do want to acknowledge that for some people, it is important. Maybe you need to pass a certain exam in order to get a job or in order to get residency in a different country. There are definitely times when these things matter. And in general, I think fluency is still a great term. It's a useful concept, and it is still something I do think about. I just don't think that it should be the success metric. But I would love to hear from all of you. What do you think? Does this idea resonate with you? Do you agree? Or do you have a different opinion? All right, if you've been following this daily language diary series, then you will know that there's just one more thing for us to do in this episode. And I really think it's gonna make you smile.